Let's now continue with our focus on the United States elections and to take a closer look at Joe Biden's foreign policy. I'm now joined by Dr. Oscar van Heerden, an international relations analyst. Good to have you with us this afternoon, Dr. van Heerden. By the look of things, Joe Biden is leading in the U.S. elections. So in all probability, if nothing changes and there are no last-minute surprises when the vote counting is indeed over, we might just have a new president of the United States. Perhaps let's take a look at what relations would look like should Joe Biden become the next president of the United States. What is his foreign policy in relation to Africa?
Well, thanks, Thami. I think that we can safely assume that, firstly, as a Democrat president of the United States, there will be much more keener interest in the continent. You would recall that Donald Trump had very scant regard for the continent and referred to us in a very derogatory way as countries that are not of any interest to him and his administration. And I think that Biden comes from a democratic progressive tradition. We are likely to see much more engagement. The post-COVID recovery that not only we as South Africans are talking about, but the rest of the continent, of course, is going to be something that we would want to put high on the agenda with the Biden administration to see how we could further advance not only the Africa Free Trade Agreement and, of course, how the United States would play a role in that in terms of concessions and favorable bilateral agreements with various African countries, but ourselves as well in renegotiating the AGOA agreement, which has been in place, as you know, for some time now.
Now, Dr. van Heerden, indeed, AGOA is in place now up until 2025. That is a policy that Trump kept in place, but he also introduced a Prosper Africa during his term. But we also can't ignore the fact that Biden will be inheriting a weakened U.S. economy post-COVID-19. So there is a possibility that he could also be more inward-looking and putting America first. What is the likelihood of that, and what would that type of approach do for Africa?
No, absolutely. You're absolutely correct, Thami. Post this devastating pandemic, I think the United States is going to have to repair a lot of things. They've had job losses in the tune of tens of millions. And so, it's not going to be an easy ride. However, I do think that with the Trump administration, a lot of damage has been done with historic relations that the United States have had, and South Africa is one of those. During the Clinton administration, for example, and the Obama administration, very strong links. I must, however, point out the pressure that you are talking about and referring to played out in the current renewal of the AGOA agreement under the Obama administration, where it got to a point where President Obama threatened South Africa with cancelling the agreement if we did not acquiesce to certain demands, in particular the dumping of chicken from chicken farmers in the United States. So not an easy ride. Biden is going to have very little room to maneuver. But I think between the two, we would probably stand ourselves in better stead with a Biden administration.
And how do we see Biden dealing with issues on the continent? We saw Trump there calling the Egyptian President El-Sisi like his favorite dictator, and him putting pressure on Ethiopia to concede to terms of the deal regarding the Nile conflict. How would Biden be dealing with this type of conflict?
Well, I think, the key thing we should really be asking ourselves is this tussle, this war between the United States and China is having devastating effects on the continent. It is forcing a number of African governments into choosing where they actually throw their support and their lot. And so those are some of the mechanisms that will have to be resolved. I think the United States are beginning to realize that a number of African countries are looking to the east, are looking to China. and they want to reposition themselves on the continent in a number of ways. There's trade on the one hand, but there's also security. Remember, one of the key divergence of the Chinese government is that they don't necessarily get involved in domestic affairs, particularly political affairs, whereas the United States do. And the United States would want to bring an assistance and aid with regards to what's going on in Libya, in Egypt, as you indicated, in Ethiopia. Zimbabwe is very much on their radar in terms of what is happening there. And so Biden, I think, is going to try and consolidate the position around providing of peace and security on the continent and the assistance they can give in that regard. But as you say, very, very little room for maneuver.
There are some who have said that Trump's approach to Africa has actually in some way been beneficial for Africa because it's been very much of a hands-off approach in some respects, and that then would have given African leaders an opportunity to sort out their own backyard. Your thoughts and comments on that?
Well, I don't necessarily agree with that. The truth of the matter is that, yes, African solutions to African problems, we don't want any direct meddling from any outside countries because we want to solve our own problems. However, as is the case historically, assistance from some of our traditional partners in the form of the United States and some European countries goes a long way in resolving many, many problems on the continent. You would recall, perhaps, Thami, that as the South African government, we've had to put in a lot of money as South Africans into peacekeeping and peace-building operations on the continent. And the United States and the United Nations, together with the EU, can play a significant role in assisting in some of those conflict areas, financially and otherwise.
And what would be Biden's immigration policy? We did see Trump there putting a lot of measures to curtail immigrants from Haiti and Africa, as well as other African countries coming into the United States.
Look, it wasn't an issue that was high on the campaigning agenda, so I don't know exactly where the Biden-Harris ticket stands on this, but having heard them on issues of Black Lives Matter, on minorities, in terms of the Islamophobia, and many, many other topics, one can assume, and safely so, that they probably will have a much more positive, a much more engaging attitude towards immigration. We must recall that illegal immigrants, particularly from South America, the sending those illegal immigrants back under Obama was at record levels, even more than George W. Bush. So at the end of the day, it's really whether there's a Democrat in the White House or whether there's a Republican, there are some issues that they all agree on, and that there's very little room to actually maneuver.
And we'll leave it at that for this afternoon. We thank you so much for your insight and your time today. That's Dr. Oscar van Heerden, international relations expert, on what a Biden presidency could do for Africa as far as international relations are concerned.